Boy, Ann, you picked a day to be here. Ann Relias is an immigration attorney, and we always have a lot to talk about. But today, the immigration news is just raining down on this. Talk about this most recent move by Trump to prevent people who want asylum to directly enter the country, or to only directly enter the country, not to have stopped anywhere else first.
For having me. Yes, today they issued, it's actually a joint interim regulation. So it's not an executive order, but they are regulations and they go in effect today, and we were only made aware of them yesterday. So even the Asylum Office, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service, and the Executive Office of Immigration Review had to scramble to provide us some kind of guidance about how this was going to go into effect. But yes, it's true. This is targeted at the Hondurans and the Salvadorans and the Guatemalans who are coming through those countries, through Mexico. And it says that those people will not be eligible for asylum unless they apply for first asylum in for El Salvadorans and Hondurans, Guatemala or Mexico. And for Guatemalans, they would have to apply in Mexico. And this is just another assault in trying to end asylum for these individuals. And this is their reaction to the humanitarian crisis that is on the southern border.
And I believe the lead group on this lawsuit is the ACLU.
Yes, correct. And they said immediately that they would file a lawsuit, and it was unclear whether they would couple it with their lawsuit that's ongoing from November of 2018, which challenged the asylum ban that Trump put in place so that people could not apply for asylum if they didn't go through an exact port of entry. But the statute is extremely clear, and it unambiguously states that any individual who seeks asylum at the border or between the ports of entry is eligible. And this will be challenged, and I think it will have a very hard time in the courts, as with most of the executive orders, regulations, and policies of the Trump administration on asylum.
Okay, but what happens today? Okay, this law was rewritten yesterday. You were told about it yesterday. It's taking effect today. It's being challenged in court today. But unless the court issues a stay, it would be in effect, would it not?
Absolutely. Yes. So currently, what people, well, this is just one in many steps that has been taken, both with the metering of people applying for asylum, so only allowing a few people a day to actually apply and have a credible fear interview. The other policies they have done, there's about 13,000 people who have had credible fear interviews by the asylum office at the border and been told you have to wait in Mexico in this very violent, vulnerable situation until their immigration court date. So that's another thing they've done. So this is a third attempt to discourage, deter, and stop people from trying to seek refuge in the country under laws that they are eligible for. So they still will be able to have review by an immigration judge. So people are still able to have these credible fear interviews. It's just that the asylum office will most likely make a determination that those people aren't eligible, and then they can seek review by a court. So that would be the recommendation, is to still go through the process as best that they can and hope that it will be enjoined shortly in a nationwide preliminary injunction, like most of these efforts have occurred through the
How
courts.
quickly could we expect an injunction to happen? With today?
They will probably do some kind of emergency motion. I believe just when I walked in here, you said the lawsuit was filed. So I think if they could get into court tomorrow or the next day, it's quite possible that they could have an injunction within the next few days.
This legal challenge was filed in California federal court. And as you said, other asylum limits efforts by the Trump administration have been blocked by federal judges. So no timetable in this news alert that just came over. I'd like to open up the phone lines. Immigration is always something that is very near and dear to Chicagoans' hearts. The number is 773-763-9278. And I will tell you, Ann, that one thing we're going to address when we come out of this break is no matter when we talk about immigration, we'll always get one caller who says, well, there's been deportations under Bush
Mm-hmm.
and Clinton and Obama. So, like, what's all the fuss about? So, I have opened the phone lines for our discussion on immigration, so please call in, continue to call in with your questions and comments on this. But I'm also going to be taking the third caller. We have a contest here on WCPT where you can win some family passes to the DuPage County Fair. And our WCPT afternoon shift intern, Rupa Pala, is going to give you all the information right now.
We are giving away a family 4-pack of mega passes to the DuPage County Fair. The association proudly continues the 178-year tradition of the county fair in DuPage. The fair honors the strong agricultural roots of DuPage County and celebrates the growing, changing, and diverse community we have become. The DuPage County Fair, the place where community gathers, July 24th through July 28th, 2019. Contests running on WCPT CPT 820 are open to listeners 18 or older and residents of the greater Chicagoland/Northwest Indiana area. One entry per person, one winner per household, void where prohibited by law. Listeners may only win or qualify to win once every 30 days. Complete rules are available on our website at WCPT.com by clicking the contest tab.
Nicely done, Rupa. Now remember, if you are the third caller at 773-763-9278, you can win that family pack of tickets to the DuPage County Fair. But when you call in, you'll have to tell them that you're calling for the contest, because we're also taking calls for people who want to weigh in on this topic of immigration. I'm talking with Ann Relias, who is an immigration attorney and has also been a part of the National Immigrant Justice Center here in Chicago. And we do have a caller here. Hi, Pat. You have a question for Ann?
Yeah, a question and a comment. First off, I am so pleased I stumbled across the radio program. I'm not from up here. I'm from down farther south in Illinois, and I just happen to be up here. And so I'm enjoying the show, especially the last that professor you had from Tennessee. But thank you. I wanted to ask, I've heard statistics that many of the people who seek asylum never really show up for their, the immigration hearings, in front of the judge. And I am all for people being able to seek asylum. My family, my wife's family is all from Mexico, and it's just it's kind of a dear thing to me. But I'm wondering what kinds of things can we be doing to preserve the opportunity for people to come here when they really need the asylum, but to prevent people from gaming the system when they know that they can just kind of claim asylum and then kind of get lost in the population.
Well, hang on a second, Pat, because I think you've made a really good point. My feeling has always been, you talk about people gaming the system. I don't think somebody gets up in the city, in the country where they've lived their whole life, where they have relatives, where they have friends, where they know the language. I don't think they just wake up one day and say, you know what? I'm gonna make my way to the United States. I'm gonna just walk out on everything and everyone I know to start a new life somewhere else. I think that there has to be a really strong motivation, fear for your safety, fear for your children's safety, absolute abject poverty where you just literally cannot live where you are. What do you think about this whole idea, Anne, that there are people, if you're not careful, will be people who game the system?
Yes, I'm so glad he asked that question, because I think it's a big misconception that, number one, they don't show up for their hearings. I don't think that's true at all. And I think the Department of Homeland Security actually has statistics that show that most of them do show up for their hearing, and it even increases more if you have an attorney. I've never had one client in 14 years of practice not show up for a court hearing. They have incentive to show up because most of these people do have a claim for asylum. It's not the way the administration characterizes it. They are fleeing violence, and they are being targeted based on their membership in a particular social group. The governments are unable or unwilling to protect them, and they have no other choice. I'm representing a woman right now who fled with an 8-year-old daughter, and she was pregnant, and she lost that baby on the way here. I'm a mother. There's no way that a mother would put her child at risk and put her other child at risk if she wasn't fleeing violence and thought there was no other opportunity to save herself and her child. So while I can't say that every single person who is at the border qualifies for asylum. Many, many, many of them do, and they're eligible. And we have a process that has been that we have put in place since after World War II to protect refugees, to protect asylees, that allows them a full and fair hearing on that claim. And they have to go through quite a few hoops. But I do appreciate that question because I do get that a lot. And I just wanted to start by saying that that most of them do attend that hearing, and that it's a lie to say that most of them do not attend the hearing. If they don't attend a hearing, it's because they do not know about it, or the court has been changed. And of course, that's not every single case, but most of that is because of some miscommunication or not knowing where they're supposed to go for that hearing. And like I said, if you have a lawyer, all of them will attend that hearing.
You mentioned something when you were talking about the kind of people who leave their home, whether, a fear of violence, or you said something about the social strata that they're a part of. Explain what you mean by that.
So to qualify for asylum, you have to prove that you're persecuted, tortured, harmed on account of a particular social group or race, religion, political opinion, nationality. It's not easy. You have to provide a nexus between the person who's persecuting you, and it has to be on account of that group. And in a lot of these countries, that group could be a genderized group. I represent a lot of women and young girls who they're a particular social group because they're females who are considered property of men or families. There's just not equality between men and women in a lot of these countries. So the persecution is based on the fact that they're a woman from that country and maybe in a domestic relationship or some kind of family relationship. So they are persecuted on account of that ground. And then the government is unable or unwilling to protect them from that persecution. And that is why they're fleeing. It's not just generalized violence. It's societal, it's cultural, and in a lot of cases, it's genderized. There are also young boys who are targeted by gang members and don't want to be involved in a gang. And if they resist the gang membership, then they could be killed or their families could be targeted. So this is another social group that we believe should be protected by the asylum laws. And after almost a decade or more of litigation, we have established that these two types of groups are particular social groups under the law. And the administration single-handedly is trying to reverse decades of hard-fought litigation to establish protection for these vulnerable groups.
I'm talking with Anne Relias. She's an immigration lawyer, and we've discussed this topic before, and usually somebody calls in and makes the point that, the Trump administration is certainly not the first administration to try to remove people from the United States, that it's happened under other administrations. And when people say that to you, how do you explain that what's going on now is different? What do you point them to?
Well, there were removals under the Obama administration, but there was also prosecutorial discretion. So they were targeting criminal aliens, and they enacted DACA to protect the children, as well as for a while they were protecting parents of DACA. So there was more discretion in terms of who they were targeting, and there is no such discretion here. They are targeting everybody. And additionally, they don't care about the inhumane treatment of these groups, the treatment, the placing of children in cages, the separation of children from adult family members. That's what's happening at the border as well. It's a full-on attack on all immigration, and it's not just asylum. Just today, there were hearings, congressional hearings before the Judiciary Committee in the House about how USCIS is delaying, we call it the invisible wall, they are delaying all processing of all applications. Right now, it's 70% longer to get something adjudicated on any immigration application in the country. So it's a full-on assault on immigration here, and it's not just removal orders. And so while I do understand that other administrations did deport people, that's part of the government's job, is to do some deportations if there is, but there's just no level of discretion, and it's the overall policies on every front that is extremely different than other administrations, and I believe, has a racial tone.
Just to be clear, under Bush or Clinton or Obama, were children taken away from their families the way they are now?
No. No, I mean, there was a decision under Flores. That's what everyone talks about. So there have been problems in the past about detaining children, which is why there's the Flores decision, which is still being litigated. But that said that you cannot hold children for more than 20 days, and if you do so, they have to be held. They have to be held in decent conditions. And this administration is actively trying to overturn that, to say, yes, we can hold children longer, and we don't care what the conditions are like. And that is what is happening. But the separation that started last summer was actually separating parents from their children, custodial parents. And what's happening now, after much litigation and, his executive order that said we won't separate them anymore, is they are still separating children, but they're separating them from grandparents, aunts, uncles, adult siblings, all these individuals who care for the children and they're separating them. And that's why you're seeing hundreds and hundreds of these children in facilities that they should not be in for more than 72 hours, and they're in there for weeks. And this type of treatment and disregard, once they learn about the treatment, was never happened under Bush or Obama.
There has been a group of immigration groups and the ACLU who've gone to court to try to stop the Trump administration's most recent effort to slow or stop immigration, which is the rule that asylum seekers cannot travel through another country before getting to the United States to apply for asylum. That is being challenged in court, and hopefully will be put in abeyance by a judge, a federal judge, hopefully in the very near future. And we want to take some of your calls. Hi, Jay. You're calling from Chicago.
Yes, I am. Hi, how you doing, Joan?
Good. Thanks for calling.
Thank you for having me. I just wanted to make a point, not only with the immigrants, and I'm saying if you don't like America, go back to the country where you're from. And I guess that he doesn't understand.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think we lost you, Jay. You broke up and then you went away. You can try calling back again. Maybe we can get a better signal. So let's go to Ivan. You're calling from DuPage.
Hey, Joan.
Hey.
Yay, ACLU.
Thank you. I think they're pretty terrific too.
Oh, yeah, I give them money. Anyway, as a veteran, I'm disgusted that while America celebrated our freedom on the 4th of July, we allow our government to set up concentration camps, imprison refugees yearning to be free, and torture little children. Now, to semi-quote my Marine Corps brother, the Reverend Wright, GD, not using the full term there.
Appreciate that.
GD, America. Aren't we better than that?
Well, I hope there are a lot more people, Ivan, who feel that way too. What's your sense of where the country's weighing in on this, Anne?
Thank you for your service, Ivan. And I agree that I think the country is outraged by the treatment of these children and the immigrants on the border. And I think that that's seen in the polls that are being done. I don't think that the Americans support this at all. And I did feel that sentiment on the 4th of July, that it was hard to celebrate with my children, knowing what was going on in these jails on the border, which I do think in some levels rises to the level of torture, especially because it's with young children, and the trauma that will affect them to come.
Well, I saw the pictures of Lindsey Graham and Mike Pence touring the men's facility. This was adult men, and it was the pictures spoke 1,000 words. I mean, these men were crowded into this area so tightly that I don't think any of them could have sat down, let alone any of them could have laid down. It was horrendous. And you see the picture of everybody standing there, looking at them and their arms crossed, and like when they come out and they're like, well, that wasn't too bad, they're not being treated all that badly. And I'm like, hello.
Right. They're being treated like animals. And, no human being is illegal. These are human beings. And there are also detention standards that have been in place for decades where these conditions are not acceptable under those standards. And they are being held. I think Lindsey Graham said you can stay. I don't care if they stay there for 400 days or something like that. And actually, that is against the Department of Homeland Security detention standards. So you're not allowed to stay in any type of facility like that more than 72 hours. And even that would be outrageous if I saw a facility like that where someone was just in for 72 hours.
I know. Those pictures were really, really appalling. Hi, Roosevelt. How are you?
How are you doing, Joan? Thank you for taking my call. Your last caller, the gentleman that spoke and said about the conditions, stole some of my thunder. But I want to get to the focus of how all this happened and how we got to this point, and that is our policies in the mid-'80s with Reagan, Iran-Contra, and everybody that speaks for Trump never brings that up, are meddling in those specific 3 countries, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Guatemala. We supported the dictatorships in those 3 countries, and that's what happened. This is the fruit of what we did. We contributed. This country doesn't bear responsibility on their actions and their interference. Look what we're doing in Venezuela. We're trying to we're doing the same thing. We're trying to install our leader, the one that benefits us, and we don't leave things alone. Look what Trump did when he ran. He said Bush should have taken the oil from the Iraqis. So our interference is big. We have to bear responsibility on what we have done in other countries. We always attack in their land. We always destroy their land, like what we did with Iraq. So that's a big part of it. And when you seek asylum, this has happened before in Cuba. Let's not forget, 1966, we had an all-Democratic presidency and Congress. And what did they do? They opened their arms to Cubans. Little kids were flying from Havana, Cuba, to the United States. And why? Because we are compassionate people. Because we do what it says on our Statue of Liberty. But somehow that has been forgotten also.
Thanks, Roosevelt. Appreciate that. We are going to take a real quick commercial break. We have lots more callers who want to weigh in on this, and we will get to those calls in just a minute. If you'd like to join our conversation about immigration, it seems not only daily developments, Anne, but hourly developments on this situation and the Trump administration's efforts to stop it. Hi, Mike. You're calling from Indiana?
Yes, ma'am.
How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you two?
Good.
Hey, 2-part question. First, do you think Hillary Clinton could become the head of DHS and take over control since she's a mother in that? And second, when we take in all of these illegal immigrants, who's going to pay for it, and which one of you two wants to put 10 of them in your basement, house them, pay for them, teach them English, teach them a skill, house them, and then pay for all their medical before we pay for anybody in California starving and living on the street of about 80,000, the same in Seattle, the same in Colorado.
Well, I'm not denying, Mike, that there's a homeless population in a lot of big cities, but a surprising number of undocumented people hold down jobs. and they pay taxes. And they don't always get the services that are supposed to come with those taxes. You want to address that, Anne?
Yes, absolutely. They're very hardworking. Once they become authorized to work, they are authorized to work while they're applying for asylum. But if you don't become a permanent resident, you will pay Social Security taxes, you'll pay Medicare taxes, and you will never get that unless you become a permanent resident and a citizen. And I've been doing this for 15 years, and I never have had to have any of my clients in my basement.
Well, walk through. If somebody is seeking asylum and they're one of the lucky few that actually seems to get their case processed.
Correct.
Where do they go? How do they find a place to live? How do they find a job?
Good question. If you are released from these jails, the detention centers, and you're paroled out of custody, you have to be paroled by the government, and they would only release you to somebody who's a permanent resident or a U.S. citizen, or a nonprofit organization or a church that would help you. After 150 days of your asylum application being pending, you are authorized to work. You get employment authorization. But as I said, you don't get any kind of benefits. You get no kind of health care, none of the benefits that a lot of individuals seem to think immigrants get until you're really a U.S. citizen. You are eligible to work, authorized to work after 100. You can apply after 150 days of your asylum application pending.
Okay. Hi, Billy. You're calling from Chicago?
Hey, Joan, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Billy. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Long-time listener, repeat caller. I just want you to know how much I love listening to you, listening to your show.
Thank you.
I wanted to apologize about the gentleman that called before me. That's the typical Republican rhetoric of bring them into your house and pay for them and all that nonsense. It's just such negative approach. I wanted to talk about a picture. I also want to remind the previous caller, it's a picture of that little girl hugging her father. She died crossing
in the Rio
river.
Grande. Yeah.
That picture made me, I shed tears a couple of days. It took me a couple of days to really get over that picture. And to the previous caller, if after seeing that picture, if you had no feelings and nothing touched you, you are no longer a human being. You have lost your ability to call yourself an American, a human being, and a Christian if you're a practicing Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or Hindu or anything. That picture is a stain on our face as Americans. And that's all I got to say.
Thanks, Billy.
Thank you.
That picture was just gut-wrenching.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been a lot of argument in journalism circles as to whether or not pictures like that should be circulated. Is that exploitation? Is it clickbait? But my argument is, how can you really know the depth of a situation without seeing something like that? I don't want to be protected. I don't want a paternalistic, journalistic editor who says, no, we are not going to share that. That's going to upset people. There are sometimes I think people need to be upset, and there are sometimes when I think it's a journalist's job to upset the apple cart.
I agree. And I think it moved a lot of people. I mean, sometimes you need to see it with your own eyes because the rhetoric and the arguments about politics, immigration is such a political issue, and it really bothers me that it's used in this way. But a photo like that cannot be politicized. I mean, that is just what is happening to a father and his young daughter. Also, there was criticism, why would this father bring his daughter? And I will just say again, they are fleeing violence, and they think that the best option for their survival is to make this trip that is so dangerous to begin with.
Yeah. Hi, Travis. You're calling from Naperville.
Yes, ma'am, I am. And two callers ago, what I could do, I was just thinking, he gave me an idea. I could probably house about 10 of those in my basement. It's $750 a day, and I can feed them, and I can have a tutor in to teach them English or whatever else I need to teach them. That's not, I'm glad he gave me an idea. I'll need to find out who I can contact to get this done.
Well, thank you, Travis. I don't know, Anne doesn't seem to think that we need a lot of basements to house these undocumented people who are coming over the border.
No. Many of them have family members that are here that would be able to assist them as well.
Connie, you're calling from Linwood?
Yes, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm going to try and make it short because I know it's almost at the end of the program. But I would like to know, does anybody ever pick up a history book? Because, they're calling these, I'm a Mexican extraction. And the people, children that have been coming from Central America mostly now, these are not immigrants. Anybody before pre-Columbian days, these were all Americas. We're all Americans. How could we suddenly become immigrants? Well, this is where our ancestors were from the day one. I don't call them immigrants. I call them Americans. And these children that they have and the way they're treating them, these are Mayan children. These are not Central Americans. These are Mayan children. And I often wonder, all I hear is what people feel from their point of view. This is our point of view, not only I. We see you differently. You're Europeans as far as we're concerned. You invaded our world. We didn't go over there. We didn't bother anybody over there. They came over here and bothered us. Now, all of a sudden, we have to accept immigrants, people of color. That's another thing that really bothers me. What do you mean by people of color? I have color because maybe I have red blood in my veins. I don't know what kind of color blood you have it. European people have in their veins. I really don't know. I don't understand this.
Usually very little color, but you make a good point, Connie. I'm sorry, you're right. We're kind of getting late. Connie makes a good point, and if anybody in the audience has picked up Tom Hartman's new book, Guns and the History of the Second Amendment, he really is a history buff, and he digs deep back into the early days of the white people who came to this country and what they created and what their intentions were, and bottom line, and he makes no bones about the fact that the war that was waged against the American Indians was one of the worst genocides to ever take place in recorded history. And she makes a good point. And one of the things that I love when you do interviews with astronauts, and they say, one of the things that they realize when they look down from the space station or the space shuttle is, gosh, there aren't any borders. It's like all one big blue marble. And, I've heard them say that they wished everybody could have that experience, that vision, and that maybe people would realize, really how artificial these border creations are.
Absolutely. And one other point I just want to make is that these asylum laws in our country are passed by Congress, and they've been in our books for many, many years. And if the president and this administration wants to change our asylum laws, a new law has to be passed by Congress. Right now, they're just trying to rewrite and circumvent everything. So
they don't want to wait. They don't want to wait for that process, and they know they can't get that legislation through.
No, and so as a lawyer, I'm what they're doing is unlawful. So we can talk about immorality and the history of our country, but what they're doing is against our laws in this country and against our international treaty obligations with the rest of the world.
We have time for another caller. Peter, you're calling from Mount Prospect?
Hi, yes. I just wanted to add on to one of your earlier callers talked about how Iran-Contra was a big part of the issue going on at the border. I think we need to really keep in mind that there's too much praise for Ronald Reagan and how he is heavily responsible for this. when he sent the Contra rebels into Nicaragua and overthrew the democratically elected government, it created a refugee crisis. People had to flee the tyrannical government that the Contras helped put in place. And now the GOP has a nerve to refuse these people entry. I mean, we got to keep in mind that Reagan was heavily overrated and a terrible person, but Trump is a lot worse. So we got to remember that the GOP is heavily responsible for the crisis at the border, and we got to hold them to task for that.
That's an excellent point, and let's hope people don't forget about these issues when the 2020 election cycle comes around. Though, Anne, I have a feeling this is not an issue we're going to be able to forget, because it's kind of like a game of whack-a-mole with this administration. Oh, let's try banning Muslims. That didn't work. Oh, let's try doing this. That didn't work. Oh, let's try tightening up the asylum rules. That didn't work. Let's try slowing down the courts. Let's try putting kids in cages.
Right.
It's never ending.
And there's no leadership to address the root causes of why there's this increase in children and families at the border. What about, instead of increasing some aid to these countries or working with these governments to ameliorate the amount of people that need to flee, we are cutting aid. We have no diplomacy with them. So we're not getting at the root. The government's not getting at the root causes of this crisis. And they're not acting like a leader. I mean, these are our neighbors. So they're not going away. And I agree with looking at the past, but also just addressing some of these root causes of this crisis in Central America that we are not doing.
So what work will you be doing in the coming weeks? Are you still involved with some of the organizations, or do you work mostly now with people on a one-on-one basis?
Yes, I do a lot of asylum representation and a lot of representation of individuals in removal proceedings here in Chicago and in other states. So that is my primary focus right now, is representing some of these individuals with asylum and the people that are in court reviewing those asylum claims.
We ever get people sneaking over the border from Canada? You know, Canadians who are in search of a better life. You know, maybe they want health care. No, that's right, they've got health care. Maybe they want a gunless. No, they've got a gunless society. I'm sorry, it was a silly question.
No.
You haven't represented anybody?
I mean, I've had a Canadian client or two before, yes, but it's a different type of claim, a different type of case.
Most of the problems with immigration, or most of the legal cases with immigration, are they people who have come into this country without the proper documentation, or is it more likely that people get a visa and overstay?
That happens all the time. Yes, it's not everybody. It's not just Central Americans on the border. It's from Europe and from abroad. They're coming in on a visa and sometimes overstaying or timely filing asylum that way.
Anne Relias, immigration attorney, always a lively discussion. Thank you so much for all of your calls today. Rick Unger is next. Santita Jackson will be here at 6 a.m. For Tony Porter and Rupa Pala, I'm Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Thank you for being a part of our show today. Have a good evening. Good night.